It is 9 a.m. and it is great to be back. The forums are returning. We'll go on a brief hiatus next week for Blessing of the Animals, which is sort of takes over this whole place in a delightful way. We have one dog regular at 7:30, a giant mastiff named Tallulah that is just the sweetest dog. And then a second dog came, so it's like we do our little mini animal blessing every Sunday at 7:30. And today is our Celebration of Ministries Sunday. So after this, if you are here or if you're on your way here, I know some of you stream this while you're driving. Keep your eyes on the road, please. There's lots of tables, lots of information about different ministries here at All Saints Church. We'll take a break from the forum next week, but then the week after that, on the, I believe it's the 8th of October, it's calling it our Cornerstone Sunday. It is the 100th anniversary of the laying of the cornerstone of All Saints Church. And it's going to kick off really a year and maybe a little more of centennial observances where we really, we engage our past and embrace our present and dream together into the future. And we're going to be learning a lot about who we are, who we have been, and who we are becoming. And so because of that, it is just perfect to have you. It's always perfect to have you here. So I want to introduce our guest this morning, which is the Reverend Gayle Fisher-Stewart. I know you primarily as an author and a friend, and you're a recently, I hesitate to say retired. You are no longer being paid to be an Episcopal priest.
There you go. Not getting paid.
No. Longtime resident of Washington, D.C. Before you were ordained, you were with the Metropolitan Police Department in Washington. Yeah. You taught at the university level. Now you're doing a lot of work.
Can't keep a job.
You can't keep a job. Well, you end up working a lot, just not getting paid. So it is wonderful. And we were saying this before. It's like, I feel like we've spent so much time together, but yet this weekend is the first time we've actually met.
Yes.
But Gayle has been with us as a preacher and a forum guest online on Zoom. And then her first book, Preaching Black Lives Matter, many of us have read. And the second book, Black and Episcopalian, that was our summer book read, and we've actually had a couple different chances to read that. Talk about sort of examining our history, embracing our history. This is a big part of our history. And so just thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you.
And just want to start, first of all, can we just give a welcome to Reverend Gayle Fisher-Stewart?
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, whoops, caught me sipping my coffee. So I'm interested, I want to touch first off on the Preaching Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
And can you just sort of talk a little about where the idea of that book came from, what the process of putting that book together was like, what you learned, what surprised you, and then also sort of how was it either embraced or not embraced, and sort of the reaction to it?
Well, the first book, Preaching Black Lives Matter, was not actually my idea. There is a book called Teaching for Black Lives that came out around 2018, and Canon Stephanie Spellers put on Facebook, no, we need a Preaching Black Lives Matter. Who would like to do that? And so I said, okay, I will. And then I waited for somebody to do it. Right. And then all of a sudden, I was the one to do it. I said, okay, it was accepted by Church Publishing. I'm going, okay. Who do I know? Who don't I know? So I put it on Facebook. Do you want to write? Do you want to be an author? Calling people I don't know. I didn't know. I knew of Mike, and I said, can you write an essay? Yeah. And so I was really concerned. I said, I'm not going to have enough people to write. Mm-hmm. And there were 54 different writers, and it looks at just people's journeys, like, how do you preach? How do you preach for Black lives? How do you preach if you're white and your congregation is white? Do they want to hear preaching about Black lives? Even if you're Black and you have a Black congregation, some of us don't want to hear it. So how do you kind of walk that fine line between preaching, and it's not preaching Black lives, it's preaching God's justice. How do we make God's justice real here and now? And then looking at seminary, what's being taught in seminary, who's being taught in seminary. If you want to read Kelly Brown Douglas or James Cone, do you have to go to the Black track, to get that, because it is not part of the required curriculum, right? And how does that feel when you have all of these white theologians who are required, but you don't have theologians of color who are required? That tells you you're not important. You can take it over here, as an elective. And somebody said, yeah, I took 2 courses and they didn't even accept the credits, So things like that. And then traveling for Black lives. Seminaries and churches do pilgrimages to the Holy Land all the time. Where's the pilgrimage to the civil rights sites in the South? What role does that play in our formation? And then formation, just who are we? During I think it was the 80s, there was this commercial for a clothier with Cy Sims. And he said, an educated consumer is the best customer. How much do we really know about the church as we become Episcopalians? We know what people want us to know, but if we truly knew everything about Christianity and the church, you're like, maybe I can follow Jesus without the church, right? Right? I can follow Jesus. He was none of this, so I'm going to be over here with Jesus while you all figured out this formation thing. So who are we forming? Why are we forming? Why are we afraid for people to delve into the history of the church, the history of Christianity, the history of the Episcopal Church? What are we afraid of people finding out? And then questioning, like, how in the world did you all think that was actually right? How did you think, as we look at the history of the Episcopal Church in our parishes when it was a Church of England, how did you think it was okay for the vestry to actually go to the auction block to purchase human beings and attach them to the glebe, the area around the church and the rectory? How did you all think that was right? What God were you following? So those types of questions came up. And so in Preaching Black Lives Matter, you have folks who had written, because, you have Will Gaffney in there, you have Kelly Brown Douglas in there, but you have a whole lot of people who would never have an opportunity to write anything. And they were given that opportunity. And so when we were doing the publicity report, folks would say, I'm a published author. And they were just so happy about it, But giving people an opportunity to express themselves when no one else would take a chance on them. And so that's how this one got started. But it just started other stuff.
And then that leads to the second one. The second one, to me, and I want to hear you talk about this, it feels like at least 2 different things.
Yes.
The first is that deep dive into the history of, we're going to actually learn about this. And the second piece is a very personal struggle with you of, Black and Episcopalian, and can I actually have these 2 identities? So can you talk about sort of how that book came to be?
I tell folks that, and I've only been ordained 6 years, I think. I was ordained in 2015, but I've been Episcopalian, seems like forever. And I said that the Lord finally put a collar around me to keep me in the church, because I've got one foot out of the church every single day. And I'm willing to admit that. And other folks, I want to give them freedom to admit that. No, I struggle with being in the church. And so I said, the Lord said, no, I need to put a collar around that woman or she's going to be gone. So I did it, and then I decided, okay, I'm retiring. Well, you're not 72 yet. I'm 71. I can retire. I got 5 years. Okay, so I can go. But it really came about as we were doing our anti-racism training in the Diocese of Washington. We need to know the history. And I'm going back trying to find history from Church of England, because we're right at ground zero, Virginia, We're right across the bridge from Virginia. What is the history of black folk being in the Church of England and the Episcopal Church? And so I was reading all of the books, Episcopalians and Race and all these books. And I'm going, there's something that's missing. There's something about wardens and their role. And I'm going like, I can't find it in any of these books. And then I remembered a law book that I used teaching, and written by A. Leon Higginbotham. And so I said, no, let me get this law book. And that's where I found the laws where they actually mention how the church wardens, served as the police, correctional officers, and judges. And so I said, see, I knew that word warden. Let me go find that word warden. And so then in putting all of that together, like, what does this mean? Why don't I know this history of the church? And let me make a decision whether or not I want to be part of this and how to be a part of it. So looking at the history, and then what does it mean to be black? All black, guess what? All black people ain't alike, okay? Okay? Right, shock. All black people are not alike. What does it mean to be black and Episcopal? Number one, what does it mean to be Episcopalian beyond the Book of Common Prayer? So can I bring my whole self to the church? However I define my whole self, however you define your whole selves. Or do I have to kind of divest myself in the narthex and then fit into a mold when I sit down for the liturgy? What am I gaining through the liturgy? And one thing about presiding, and I have to keep, when I preside, I have to talk to myself. Keep going, you can't stop here and ask a question. You have to keep going, have your conversation after the service is over, because you can't say, yeah, we got to this part in the Nicene Creed, so let's stop right here and have a conversation. No, I got to keep going, right? So how do I bring my whole self, and what does that look like when I bring my whole self? And in fact, a couple of weeks ago, we had the installation service at one of our churches, which is a combination of African, Afro-Caribbean, and Latino. And they installed their Latino rector, okay? That service, I said, this has the potential to be a truly multicultural liturgy, not multiracial, because we have plenty of multiracial that end up being Anglican, okay? But to have truly multicultural, where you hear different music, where you hear the prayers in different languages, where the flow, you can still see the ebb and flow of the Book of Common Prayer, but it's in flesh differently. So whoever walks into that church gets to say, I feel me here. I don't have to leave me out here and become something else. I see me. Like, the first thing I do when I walk into church is I look at stained glass windows. The second thing I look for is, do you have Levis in the book rack? Because I look at the stained glass windows, I look for Levis, and I know,
Levis is Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Thank you.
The black hymnal.
The black hymnal.
There's several black hymnals. The black hymnal that we really need to pull out, other than Black History Month. Right? Black History, we get all black. And then on March 1st, we go back to being whatever it is. But, whoever walks into our church, whoever visits, do they see themselves, or are they told, this place really does not value me? Okay? By your iconography, by your hymnody. When you go into some black churches and the entire altar party is white. And I go like, you couldn't find out one black person to be up there? What does that tell people? And so, so going through Black and Episcopalian, whether or not I could be Black and Episcopalian, I finished the book, and there were more questions. So now I got to write a third book. Really, these books are for me. I am so glad you all are reading them, but really, they are for me and my struggle with the church. I don't have a struggle with God. I don't have a struggle with Jesus or the Holy Spirit. I struggle with the church. I struggle with the church. Do you really want me? Mm-hmm. And what does that look like?
Mm-hmm. Oh, man. I just want to sit with that just for a second. Thank you. The voice that you just said, what you just voiced, for me, one of the most powerful parts of the book, the history was amazing, and just, talk. I love books where it's like, oh, yeah, I know this stuff, and then I'm like, oh, no, I didn't know that. But after every chapter, just these quotes. And you really, you just identify, female clergy, male, it's like, and it's sort of the safety of anonymity, but I'm getting chills just like thinking about it. It is the power of listening to each other's lived, what Otis Moss calls lived expertise.
Right.
And it just, to me, the book is amazing, but those were the pieces that were like, these are real people. And they're just speaking from their hearts, and their voices that I feel like, oh wow, like these voices are in so many, if not all, of our churches, and makes me sort of like, how are we listening to? We can read a book, but also it's like, okay, there's people in my church who are voicing the same things that you are, who are struggling with church, who are wondering, is there a place for me? I'm wondering, how has this book been received by different constituencies around the church? including, I don't want to just sort of say, oh yeah, well, black people must love this, white people must, I'm absolutely sure it's not that simple.
No.
How has it been received? Where has it resonated? Where has it touched nerves? What are you learning about this church that we struggle with?
What am I learning? The most frequent question I get is this book for white people? On my good day, I will say yes. On my bad day, I will say it's a book. Right? But Black and Episcopal, why do I need to know about Black and Episcopal? It's the history of the church. And so I really appreciate the book reads that you've had here and other places, but primarily it's been with individuals who have picked it up and read it and said, I resonate with that. It lets me know I'm not crazy. And I've discussed it. I bought it for my children. I bought it for my grandchildren. I bought it for my aunt. And then I've had people say, this is a tough read because people don't want to hear this. They don't want to know the history. They think that everything's okay. They don't want to know why we have historically black parishes. I say, because y'all didn't want us. It's not that we decided to go, oh, let's go off and worship by ourselves. No, you either put us up in the balcony or you said we couldn't come in. And so when we have the black churches, the black parishes, it's because we were not welcome. And so now we talk about, okay, well, we've got to reconcile. And I hate that word because you only reconcile what a relationship you had, and it was broken, and now you're trying to put it together. Blacks and whites have never had a relationship in this church. So we need to do some concile before we can reconcile, right? And so, okay, well, let's look at the black parishes, and they're suffering. What do you expect? That they are suffering. One of the things, and I tell folks that integration was necessary, but integration hurt black people. Because under segregation, we were all together. You had the doctors and the lawyers and the folks on welfare all living in the same place. But with integration, we left. And some of us forgot the folks back home. And we also left our churches because now we can go worship at the white church, okay? Which left our black churches. And now our black churches are facing gentrification of the areas in which they find themselves. And I said, our black churches are in exile. We ain't go nowhere. Exile came to us. Exile came because people of color will worship in a white church, in a white church. It is difficult for white people to decide to worship in a black church. And so we're in seas of whiteness, and people won't come to the church. They'll stick their heads in and go, ooh, no. Let me go someplace else. And so then when we talk about how do we save the church, well, let's merge. So you all know where I'm going. Who's going to merge? The black church is going to merge with the white church. Well, why? We have more resources. Our buildings are better. Our this is that. Well, let's deal with why that exists in the first place. Why is white always better? Right? Why is white always better? And so this book asks some difficult questions that people do not want to deal with. Because you have to go in here and ask, why am I, as a black person, worshiping in a church where I am the only one? I don't want to ask that question because I don't want to hear the answer, because I like being the only one. Okay? I like being the fly in the buttermilk, right? Or why, after the Civil War, black people left the Anglican church that became the Episcopal Church in droves because it was the church of the enslaver. Why did we go back? Why did we leave our black churches, our AME churches, Baptist churches? And when I ask folks like, you were Baptist, you were AME, well, they're too loud. What does that mean? Well, they don't have liturgy. Excuse me, what do you mean they don't? Every church has a liturgy. It might not be your liturgy, but it's a liturgy. Okay? And so this book kind of puts those questions in people's faces that they don't want to answer. But if we are going to be part of this church and part of what God wants for God's creation, we need to deal with those questions openly and honestly.
Like I was trying to go through this book, and it's one of these books where it's like I highlight like half the book. So that's really hard. And so it's like but just like early on, and this may actually be something Kelly Brown Douglas wrote. He says, "We cannot be afraid of where an investigation of history will take us. In the practice of becoming beloved community, we are called to tell the truth about our churches and race." Mm-hmm. I'll say from our own experience of trying to have and of having that conversation here at All Saints, it's been a struggle in this community. Mm-hmm. And it's been and it's sort of, I love this, I appreciate it said we cannot be afraid because it feels that there is a fear reaction, and not just from white people. Mm-hmm. And there is also, and this is primarily what I have found among us as white people, we go really quickly to a place of shame, and that just becomes just such a huge barrier. And to me, I look at this and I say, this is about liberation for all of us. Mm-hmm. That's why I love it. This is about becoming beloved community. And yet that instant reaction can be a barrier. And so what I'm wondering is, as you've gone around the church, mm-hmm. and there are churches that are predominantly white in membership and in culture that are trying to do this, that are trying not to be afraid and have mm-hmm. this conversation, what's working?
What's working? What you have to do, and Ibram Kendi was asked this question in an interview because there's the ban on books and the ban on teaching history and all that kind of stuff, and he said, there were white people who enslaved, and there were black people who were enslaved, but there were black people and white people who were abolitionists. Why can't you identify with the abolitionists? Right? So if you're feeling shame, you have decided to take that side. No one has said you are racist, you are this. You've decided to take that side. And so when you're teaching the kids are saying, look, the abolitionists, you know, we're going to be on this side. This is how we're going to learn. And so if there is that shame, it's because people, for some reason, my question is, why do you need to feel shame?
Right. Yep.
Why do you need to feel shame? I'm not going to try to convince you otherwise, but why do you need to feel that way? And so those types of questions also have to be asked. Why did you immediately go that way? Why do you feel shame? You know, even if your family enslaved, even if your family participated in segregation, whatever, what are you doing? What are you doing? Are you going to carry all of that baggage? You're going to just take it and have it just envelop you? Yep. Or are you going to say, yes, this is how it was. I don't have to go there. I don't have to go there. So, you know, it's almost like we have to give people freedom to free themselves. Like just because you're white doesn't mean you got to carry all that baggage. But you at least have to discuss it. Just like, I mean, one thing you know, black people enslaved too. Some blacks actually went to the auction block and purchased their own people. Some blacks became owners because they were willed black people by their white fathers. Others, if you look at, say, the state of Virginia, once you were freed, you had to leave the state. So we're not going to break up the family. So I will become your owner to keep you in the state. You don't ever hear that. Native Americans enslaved black people. Okay, let's get it out there. Let's figure out why, what that meant, how that came about. And how do you embrace your history, but also let go of that which is not directly connected to you? I mean, because if you look at black folks, we had enslavers in our families. I mean, look at us. Look at us, right? We didn't get off the boat this color, right? And so to have, to create an environment where people feel safe, because I said, you know, when you're going to have conversations, wear sweat clothes. Wear sweat clothes, because we're going to be tussling. Because if people don't feel safe saying what they need to say, even if it's like, I'm a dyed and wool racist, okay, you need to say that. If they're not able to say that, then they're not going to hear anything else that is being said. And so people have to be able to say what they need to say. Get it off. Get all of that. Just confess. You know, we'll have plenty of oil and water, whatever you need. We'll have plenty of it for you to confess and get whatever it is off without being shamed. Without being shamed. Get it out there. And once we do that, then we can figure out, where do we go from here? How do we deal with that history?
Yeah. And even that phrase, where do we go from here? We heard Eddie Anderson talk about that a little yesterday, you know, the title of Dr. King's, you know, book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community? Right. And it just feels like, wow, that's 50 years later, and those seem to be the poles that are still there, chaos or community. You know, but the question is, like, one of our values is radical inclusion here at All Saints Church. And, you know, we were having a conversation last night, and one of the things that you said is, like, okay, what's it worth to you to actually be what you say you are on your website? And we've actually been looking at that term. I love radical because it's at the root. But even that word inclusion has raised, what are we including people into? Are we saying we have this culture that we're not going to change, but everyone is welcome to join it? Or do we want to, may even change it to sort of radical welcome, but it's basically who gets to define the us. And one of the things that I've noticed, and you said we can't be afraid, and it's like, okay, well then what is the fear? As I have been listening, and there are as many different fears as there are contexts of individual stories. And one of them is we have an operative replacement theology. And we saw that people in tiki torches in Charlottesville, Jews will not replace us, blacks will not replace us. There is this fear, we're not all grabbing the tiki torches, but there is this fear of, okay, well, if someone else's culture is centered, then I'm going to be excluded. And so how, and I'm not asking you to have the answers to these things. I'm saying, first of all, have you noticed that? And, perfect love casts out fear. Maybe we talk about that. How do we, get through that? Recognize, because to me, I'm thinking, well, what about the experience of the people who've never been in the center? That's sort of like up through a whole bunch out there. Your thoughts?
A whole bunch. A whole bunch. Oh, radical inclusion in a church that excludes. Mm-hmm. Let that sit a moment.
Yep.
Because we're Episcopalians. Therefore, you must pray a certain way, you must think a certain way, you must sing a certain way. So we've just excluded, right? We say we include, but no, we don't. If you don't know when to stand and when to sit, you're excluded, right? And, if you say hallelujah, we don't do that in the church, and you say amen only at the end of a prayer, so, right? So we talk about including when we actually exclude. We actually exclude, because if you're going to come here, you have to be a certain way. So that's not including. Bring who you are. No, bring some of you, and we're going to fix the rest of you so that you are like us. So what does it mean to be Episcopalian? What are the values of the Episcopal Church as opposed to what's the liturgy and what are the rules and what are the canons? What are the values of the church? We forget the values of the church and come with all of these rules that you have to fit into, that on occasion we break, because we say, you can't receive communion unless you're baptized. And we just threw that out. Now you go like, we don't know who was baptized under that last table. All we know is some dirty feet under that table that last evening, right? So we break rules when it's convenient for us, but we don't want to break rules to include folks who are searching for something. The whole system of denominations is about exclusion. Well, we don't like this song over here, so we're going to go over here and start this denomination. And we don't like the preaching over here, so we're going to go over here and start this denomination. And we're just going to split the church in two because of a phrase in the Nicene Creed, that says, the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son, where the East said, no, we said that they're all equal, right? So you can't have the Holy Spirit proceed from the Father and the Son if they're all. So we're just going to split the church over that, and we won't say that anymore. Right? So the thing is what are we about? Because Jesus is over in the corner somewhere going like, over here. Me? Over here. I'm not Episcopalian. I'm not Christian. I'm not Baptist. I even fought the folks who were like me. I tried to turn my own religion upside down, and I don't know what you people are doing, but it's not looking anything like me. It's not looking anything like me. But because people have been taught this is how it is to be Episcopalian, a proper, an elitist Episcopalian, that when you talk about changing some things, like where do I fit in then? The number of people who still want the 1928 Book of Common Prayer? Really? Seriously? But that's what it is to be Episcopalian, to have the 1928 Book of Common Prayer. Or it takes us forever to change the Book of Common Prayer. Folks still want right one. We don't thou and thee and thiseth, But that's what it means to be Episcopalian. So people ask, well, where am I if you change all of this? And so we have to walk with them. Because a lot of times we just throw stuff out and see where it lands, right? So we have to walk with them and let them know that, you will still be Episcopalian after all of this. We'll still bury you when you die, because that's a big issue. Who's going to bury me when I die? I'm going like, guess what? You won't know. But anyway, you won't know. But we'll make sure you have everything you want. Maybe. Depends on what day it is. But how do we take the church along? Because if the Episcopal Church wanted to be a multi-racial church, instead of an overwhelmingly white church, it could have done it a long time ago. So it's predominantly white because it wants to be white. And we have to say that. We have to say that. Folks say, but I live here and there's just no people of color anyway. Well, you did decide to move there, didn't you? Right? So having those tough conversations, having forums like this where you really ask, what is it that you need from the church? I just need Jesus. And just give me Jesus. I'm fine. But what is it that you need from the church to be somebody? And that's what it is. There's something lacking in people's selves, and when you start changing that, like you're taking my arm, you're taking my foot, you're taking my head. No, we're not doing that. You can bring all of that to a church that looks more and more like Jesus.
I could go so many directions, and I want to just turn it over to folks here because we've had a chance to talk. Yes. And want to have, and so questions, thoughts, comments. Let me get back here and introduce yourself. Say your name first.
Hey, I'm Martin Weech, and thank you very much. I read your book.
Thank you.
I was in the book club or book study from here at All Saints. Amazing. Thank you. Question I have for you is, I love, one of my favorite things about Jesus is when he threw the the tables over and he was really pissed. When I read the book, I'm glad you came to the last book study, the last group, because I can't say I was afraid of you, but I thought I had a whole different from the book of you. But I love that. I actually love that because it was honest. There was anger in there. One thing I struggle with the church is anger. And I'm going to say, I'm asking you this, how you dealt with it while writing the book. How you dealt with that. Did you go to therapy or did you? Or did you have some, I'm just a question I have, because came up.
This was therapy.
Yeah, amen, amen.
This was therapy. Writing was therapy. I constantly have questions. And sometimes I can get people to answer them, and most times I have to go and answer them for myself. So this was therapy. And the fact that you bring up Jesus, and a lot of times we think that Jesus was angry, right? We put that on Jesus. And I remember telling, when I was out of the church, telling a friend of mine, I said, I can't deal with your milquetoast Jesus. I mean, you would have thought this thunderbolt was going to knock. I said, I can't deal with that milquetoast Jesus. The one who's, everything going to be okay. Let's just go here. The one that this one. I said, I can't deal with that Jesus. But when I started asking questions and studying for myself, studying the Bible for myself, reading it with fresh eyes, when I got to the temple, I said, oh, this is a kick-ass Jesus. I can go with him. You can't use. I said, no, this is a kick-ass Jesus, because we're told stories of how to interpret that, but what he was really doing, he was rebelling against the religion of his time that said, you are not treating people right. You are not treating people right. So I'm going to take all the stuff that you hold dear and I'm going to turn it every way but loose. I said, I can get behind that, Jesus. And when I started using that term in church, folks go, oh, Lord, she's going to get us all. But I said, no, that's a kick-ass Jesus. I like him. I like that other one that's praying all the time. I can't deal with that one. So I really can't. I can't deal with that one all the time. But this writing was therapy, because as I tell people, I could leave here, get on a plane, go back home, and never step foot in church again. I could. And it would not really bother me, because church is not the only place I can find Jesus. I can find Jesus anywhere. In fact, I probably find more Jesus out of the church than in the church. So yeah, this is answering questions that really keep me in the church. Because it'd be so easy to go to St. Mattress. Oh.
St. Mattress.
St. Mattress, Holy Comforter.
Next time you come, we're just going to book you for a set at the Comedy Store. That is awesome. Other questions? Steve, let me get the...
Reverend Gayle, we're so appreciative of you being here and diving into your book. We went through it 3 times. But I want to just say something personally, which is, it meant so much to me to find out who I was in this church and how it got there. There was nobody that unraveled that, and all of the education and all of the formation that existed, and why didn't that happen? There were so many contributions for African Americans in the Episcopal Church. We never hear about that.
Never.
Other than the iconography. So what you laid out, and you mentioned it yourself, because you said you went through seminary and never learned about this.
No.
And I think
even
that's
went
important.
to an Episcopal seminary.
Yes. So can you speak to that? Then how we go forward from there?
See, when I went to seminary, I had I was not being ordained. I was barely in church. But I had questions. I thought I'd go to seminary, maybe I'd get some answers. Well, that didn't help. I mean, I learned a lot, but I came out with more questions than answers. And then when I finally stopped running from the Lord and said, you need one of these, although I had been Episcopalian for over 50 years, they had to make a proper Episcopalian out of me, so they sent me to Virginia Theological Seminary for a year. Anyway, moving right along. The thing about learning who you are and learning that history, and there's even more, because as we are looking at reparations, right? Everybody's looking at reparation, and we think this is brand new. We think this is brand new, but in 1968, Presiding Bishop John Hines, after seeing Detroit and other cities burn, right, dedicated this church to eliminating racism and poverty, okay? And at the there was a general convention for special programs to lay this out. This is some fun stuff. This we go. Okay, I can stay in the church now. There was James Foreman, right? Had a black manifesto that called for white churches to give the black community $500 million in reparations. White churches, white synagogues, and so they wanted that presented at this special convention. And so Presiding Bishop John Hines is talking about clergy deployment, and Muhammad Kenyatta, who was with the group. And this was all planned by the young Turks, the young black priests with their dashikis and their afros. They came up and took the mic out of the presiding bishop's hand and presented the Black Manifesto. Okay? The thing about it is that Hines actually met with them and made a commitment, he and executive council, to work with black communities. You know how it was derailed? There were two things. One, he forgot to ask black folks in the church. Okay. Two, it was from white congregations that that's not what we're supposed to do. You are supposed to take care of us, not the people out there. And it derailed it to the point that he resigned his episcopacy early. And he and his wife moved first to Texas, then Florida, or Florida and Texas. And here's a presiding bishop who never participated at the national level of the church for the rest of his life because of how he was treated when he said, we're going to do Jesus' work. Okay? We're going to do Jesus' work. This is what happens when you do Jesus' work. Okay? But, just the history of knowing, because everybody's saying, oh, reparations is new. No, reparations has been tried before. The Executive Council set aside money from the church's budget to do this. And because of the church, it was derailed. Because of people sitting in the pews, it was derailed. We don't really want to get rid of racism. We don't really want to, get rid of poverty. You're supposed to, pastor, rector, you're supposed to minister to us, not them out there. So it was the church that derailed, the people in the pews derailed reparations in the late 60s and 70s. So we've been this way. You got to know the history. You got to know the history. And why? So that we know, okay, if we talk about reparations, for example, the latest poll says 54% of white Christians think that racism is all in our heads. You don't think some of those 54% in the Episcopal Church? And so when we do that, we have to remember, okay, we don't know what percentage is in the Episcopal Church. We like to think of ourselves as being this liberal bastion. But as I tell folks, I said, Tucker Carlson is in my diocese. And if you don't think there's some other folks like that sitting in our pews, you're fooling yourself. And so we have to go in there girded up to know that this is what we're going to face, but we can't do it if we really want to follow Jesus.
We've got to let Keith get to this, and I got to get you into the pulpit. So can we just say thank you to the Reverend Gayle Fisher-Stewart?
Thank you.
And to be continued. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.